When my grandfather passed away, I inherited a large piece of property tucked away in the quiet countryside. It wasn't just any patch of land, it was a wide stretch of forest, rolling hills, and a lake that seemed untouched by time. My family always called it the Ridge. As a kid, I spent summers there fishing with my grandfather, building forts in the woods, and learning the value of hard work. He always used to say, "Land is the one thing they aren't making any more of. Protect it, because once it's gone forever." After his passing, life pulled me away. I was busy with work in the city, traveling frequently, and barely had time to think about the Ridge. The land sat untouched for years. I paid the taxes, kept the title locked away, and assumed one day I'd go back to it when life slowed down. It wasn't until nearly a decade later that I finally made the trip back. Something inside me, it might have been burnout from the city, or just the pull of nostalgia, told me it was time to revisit my grandfather's legacy. I drove up the old gravel road I remembered so well, expecting to see overgrown grass, maybe a few fallen trees, but otherwise the same quiet landscape. Instead, what I saw nearly sent me into shock. The woods had been cleared. My grandfather's trails were bulldozed. And where his little cabin once stood, there was now a row of shiny, cookie-cutter wooden cabins lined up like a vacation resort. Not one or two cabins, 20 of them. Each one painted the same shade of beige, each with identical porches, brand new mailboxes, and cars parked out front as if families were already living there. For a moment, I thought I must have taken a wrong turn. Maybe this wasn't the Ridge. But as I climbed out of my car and looked around, the landmarks were undeniable. The old oak tree where my grandfather had carved our initials still stood. The lake was still in the distance. This was my land. And someone had built an entire community on it. Confused and furious, I approached one of the cabins. A middle-aged man in shorts and flip-flops stepped out, giving me a strange look. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep calm. "What are all these cabins doing here? This is private land." The man raised his eyebrows and gave a laugh. "Private? Buddy, this is the Hickory Ridge HOA community. Been here for years. Bought our place from the association 2 summers ago." HOA. My stomach twisted. I'd dealt with homeowners associations before, always nosy, always power-hungry, and always greedy. But how in the world could an HOA exist here, on land that was never for sale? I didn't argue with the man. Instead, I walked further down, my pulse racing. Everywhere I looked, there were signs of an organized neighborhood, manicured lawns, speed limit signs, even a little wooden arch at the entrance that read Hickory Ridge Estates. I remembered my grandfather's words, "Protect the land." And now it looked like I had failed him. But the thing was, I still had the deed. I had the title locked away in a fireproof box back home. There had been no sale. No transfer. No permission. So how in the world were these people living here as if they owned the place? I pulled out my phone and began taking pictures of everything, the cabins, the road signs, even the cars parked in the driveways. Something wasn't adding up, and I was determined to find out what. As I walked back toward my car, a woman in a golf cart screeched to a halt in front of me. She had that classic Karen look, oversized sunglasses, a permanent scowl, and the air of someone who thought she owned everything in sight. "Excuse me," she barked. "What are you doing taking pictures of our community? You can't just trespass here." I narrowed my eyes. "Trespass? Lady, this is my land." She laughed, a sharp and condescending sound. "Your land? This is HOA property. Every inch of it is managed by us. If you're not a resident, You need to leave before I call security. I almost lost it right then. But I kept my voice steady. Why don't you go ahead and call them? Better yet, call the police. I'd love to explain to them how this entire neighborhood was built without the actual landowner's permission. Her face dropped for a split second, but then she smirked. Oh, sweetie, you must be confused. We've been here a long time. The HOA handles everything. With that, she sped off in her golf cart, no doubt heading to rally her troops. I stood there in disbelief, my fists clenched. 20 cabins. Families living here. An HOA acting like they owned the place. I didn't know exactly how they pulled this off, but one thing was certain, they weren't expecting me. And I wasn't going to back down. That night, I drove back to the city with my mind racing. I pulled out the old deed from my lockbox, holding it in my hands as proof of everything I already knew. The ridge was mine. My grandfather's signature was there. The county stamp was there. It was legal, airtight. If the HOA thought they could bully me, they were about to learn a hard lesson. Because I wasn't just some distant heir who didn't care. I had the receipts, and I was ready to use them. The very next morning, I woke up to a barrage of phone calls. The number wasn't familiar, but after the fifth attempt, I finally answered. Is this Mr. Carter? A stern voice asked. Yes, who's calling? This is Ms. Henderson, president of the Hickory Ridge HOA. It has come to our attention that you were trespassing on private community property yesterday. I'm calling to formally warn you to stay off the premises unless you are a guest of a resident. Her tone was cold, clipped, and dripping with authority. I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to yell. Listen carefully. That community property you're talking about is actually my inherited land. I own it. I've got the deed in my possession. So if anyone's trespassing, it's your entire HOA. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a scoff. That's ridiculous. The Hickory Ridge HOA has existed here for over 7 years. We purchased development rights, sold lots, and established an association. You're misinformed. Her words hit me like a slap, not because I believed her, but because of how casually she said them, as if my grandfather's land had simply been rebranded by a committee vote. I'm not misinformed, I shot back. I have the legal documents that prove ownership. And if I have to bring the county, the police, or even the courts into this, I will. Her voice hardened. Sir, I advise you not to make threats. The HOA has deep pockets and plenty of legal representation. If you try to interfere with our community, you'll be facing more than just a warning. And then she hung up. I sat there in silence, gripping my phone until my knuckles turned white. This was bigger than I thought. They weren't just squatting on my land, they had created an entire fraudulent community, complete with rules, dues, and apparently purchased rights. But purchased from who? I spent the rest of that day digging through county records online. Every property transfer, every deed, every zoning application. What I found made my blood boil. 7 years ago, right around the time I was too busy with work to pay attention, a developer had applied for permits on a portion of the ridge. The paperwork listed a sale contract, but the seller's name wasn't mine. In fact, it wasn't anyone I knew. It was a shell company, an LLC formed just a few months before the supposed sale. That fake sale was then used to get permits. The land was subdivided on paper, and the HOA was formed as if everything had been legitimate. It was fraud, plain and simple. The problem? On the surface, it looked legitimate. The county records showed development approvals, tax parcels, and an HOA association. The families living in those cabins probably had no idea. They thought they bought into a real neighborhood. But none of it mattered, because I still had the original deed. That meant everything built on my land, every cabin, every fence, every street sign, was sitting there illegally. Still, I knew this wouldn't be easy. The HOA president already made it clear they wouldn't go quietly. 2 days later, my fears were confirmed. I returned to the ridge to gather more photos and video evidence. As I parked near the old oak tree, 2 security guards in cheap uniforms pulled up in a golf cart. "Sir, you're trespassing," one of them barked. "This is private property. You need to leave immediately." I calmly pulled out my folder and held up a copy of my deed. "Actually, this land belongs to me. Here's the proof. You're the ones trespassing." They didn't even look at it. One of them smirked. "Look, buddy, we don't care what paper you've got. Our boss says you're not allowed here. So unless you want us to call the sheriff, you'd better go." That was the moment I realized just how far this HOA was willing to go. They were bluffing, trying to intimidate me. But what they didn't expect was that I wasn't easily scared. "Go ahead," I told them. "Call the sheriff. I'll be happy to explain the situation to him." For a moment, they hesitated. They hadn't expected me to call their bluff. Finally, one of them muttered, "Fine. But don't say we didn't warn you," before driving off. Sure enough, about 30 minutes later, a county sheriff's car rolled up. The deputy stepped out, sunglasses on, giving me a measured look. "Got a call about a trespasser," he said. I nodded. "That'd be me. But before you decide anything, let me show you this." I handed him the deed. He studied it carefully, flipping through the pages. His expression shifted from skepticism to surprise. This is valid. And it's recent." "Exactly," I said. "This is my land. Those cabins. That HOA. None of it should even be here." He let out a low whistle. "Well, this is above my pay grade. I can't kick anyone off today, but I can write up a report. You'll probably want to talk to the county land office and get a lawyer involved." It wasn't the dramatic showdown I wanted, but it was a start. At least the sheriff acknowledged the truth. I wasn't trespassing. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by stacks of papers. My deed. My grandfather's will. Copies of county permits and fraudulent transfers. It was like putting together pieces of a puzzle. And with every piece, my anger grew. The HOA thought they could erase my family's legacy, build their little empire, and scare me off with empty threats. But they didn't realize something important. I wasn't just fighting for land. I was fighting for my grandfather's memory. For the summers we spent fishing, for the lessons he taught me, for the promise I silently made him to protect the ridge. The HOA wanted a fight. They were about to get one. Because I wasn't going away. I had the receipts, and soon, the whole county was going to see them. After the sheriff left that day, I realized something. This fight was no longer just about me versus an HOA. This was about exposing a massive fraud. If the county had approved permits based on forged documents, then someone had been bribed, fooled, or both. I couldn't take on an entire association alone. I needed help. That week, I contacted an old college friend of mine, David, who had become a real estate attorney. He was the type of lawyer who actually cared about justice, not just billing hours. When I explained the situation, he didn't laugh it off, or tell me I was overreacting. Instead, he whistled low and said, "Man, if what you're saying is true, this HOA has no idea what storm is about to hit them." I sent him everything I had, the deed, my grandfather's will, the supposed land transfer documents, and the subdivision approvals. A few days later, he called me back with urgency in his voice. Listen, he said. You were right. The documents they used to transfer ownership are blatant forgeries. The LLC that supposedly sold the land dissolved less than a year after filing. There's no record of them ever actually owning property. They just fabricated paperwork and slipped it through zoning. How is that even possible? I asked, pacing my apartment. David sighed. Small counties, understaffed offices, and slick developers with connections. It's not the first time I've seen something like this. But I'll tell you what, it won't stand up in court. Not with the evidence you've got. Those words lit a fire in me. Finally, I wasn't crazy. Finally, someone with legal authority confirmed what I already knew. I had the upper hand. But the HOA didn't seem rattled yet. In fact, their intimidation campaign was only escalating. A week later, I drove back to the ridge to take more photographs for David. As I snapped shots of the cabins and their uniform mailboxes, a pickup truck pulled up fast behind me, blocking my car in. A heavy-set man in his 50s stepped out, wearing a ball cap with the HOA logo stitched on it. You lost, buddy, he growled. Nope, I said calmly. Just documenting my property. He spat on the ground. This ain't your property. This is HOA land. And if you keep poking around here, you're gonna regret it. I stared him down, refusing to back away. Funny. That's exactly what a squatter would say. His face went red, and for a moment, I thought he might swing at me. Instead, he stepped closer and jabbed his finger into my chest. People around here don't take kindly to outsiders. Best you pack it up and leave before something bad happens. I smiled, but it wasn't a friendly one. Here's the thing. I'm not an outsider. I own this land. And every word you just said. I've got it all on my dashcam. The man froze, glanced at my car, and saw the little blinking light. His confidence evaporated. Without another word, he stomped back to his truck and peeled away. That moment told me everything I needed to know. The HOA wasn't confident. They were scared. Scared that I had more than just claims. Scared I had proof. And they were right. By the end of the month, David and I had assembled a mountain of evidence. We had the original deed and will, county land maps, fraudulent transfer papers, and even the LLC's paperwork showing it had never owned a single acre. David also tracked down a whistleblower, a former clerk at the county office, who admitted that some expedited approvals had gone through years ago without the usual verification. Translation: someone inside the system had either been bribed or too lazy to do their job. Meanwhile, I started quietly talking to the residents of the cabins. At first, most of them avoided me, parroting the HOA line about trespassing and community rules. But after a few conversations, cracks began to show. One older couple admitted they had been suspicious when buying their cabin. The HOA had pressured them to sign quickly, promising low fees and exclusive rights to lakeside property. They'd even been told not to bother checking the county deed, because everything was handled by the HOA's lawyers. That was the hook. The HOA had swindled not only me, but also the families who thought they were homeowners. They were victims too, even if they didn't realize it yet. David's advice was simple: the more residents you get on your side, the harder it will be for the HOA to maintain their lies. If we can prove they sold property they never owned, we've got a case for fraud, theft, and damages. Of course, the HOA wasn't going to let that happen quietly. A week later, I received an envelope taped to my apartment door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with the words, "Drop it. Or else." Classic intimidation tactic. I showed it to David, who shook his head. Good. Now we've got evidence of harassment too. Keep everything. Document everything. The HOA thought they could scare me into backing down. They thought I was just some city guy with no backbone. But they had no idea what they were dealing with. Because for every threat they made, I doubled down on my determination. For every roadblock they threw at me, I found another piece of evidence to dismantle their case. And the deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. The HOA wasn't just wrong, they were running a criminal operation. By the time David filed the first official complaint with the county court, we had a case thick enough to crush them. Fraud, illegal development, trespassing, harassment, and even potential tax evasion. The HOA might have built their little empire of cabins, but they built it on quicksand. And I was about to sink them with the receipts. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I expected. Word had already spread around the ridge that some outsider was trying to take down the HOA, but what most of the residents didn't realize was that I wasn't trying to take away their homes. I was trying to reveal the truth about the fraud that had trapped them. Walking into the county courthouse with David by my side, I felt the weight of my grandfather's legacy on my shoulders. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about justice. Inside, the HOA had shown up in full force. Their president, Ms. Henderson, sat at the front of the courtroom with a team of expensive lawyers in dark suits. Behind them, several board members whispered nervously, while a few cabin residents looked on with confusion. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp glasses, called the case. Carter versus Hickory Ridge HOA. David stood tall and clear-spoken as he presented our case. He laid out the deed, the will, and the county's own records proving my ownership of the ridge. He showed how the supposed sale from the shell company was fraudulent, how the LLC never owned the land in the first place, and how every approval the HOA received was based on a lie. The HOA's lawyers tried to spin it differently. They claimed good faith ownership, arguing that since families had been living there for years, the land had effectively become HOA property. They accused me of being opportunistic, of waiting years to strike. But David was ready. He pointed out that I had consistently paid taxes on the land, never once missed a filing, and that the HOA had never paid a dime in property tax. Then came the kicker, the whistleblower testimony. A former county clerk took the stand and admitted that approvals had been pushed through without proper verification. He even recalled being pressured by someone connected with the development company. The judge's face grew colder by the minute. When it was Ms. Henderson's turn to testify, she strutted up with arrogance, speaking as though she was the savior of the community. "We created a neighborhood," she said proudly. "We brought families together. Without us, this land would have sat empty. Mr. Carter abandoned it." I finally spoke then, my voice steady, but loud enough to carry through the courtroom. "I didn't abandon anything. This land was my grandfather's, and it's been in my family for generations. What you did wasn't building a community, it was stealing. You didn't just take land. You took trust, you took peace of mind, and you lied to every family sitting in those cabins." For the first time, I saw hesitation in her eyes. The judge tapped her pen against the desk. "I've heard enough." The ruling came swiftly. The court declared the deed in my name as the only valid title to the ridge. The HOA had no legal standing. Every cabin, every road, every mailbox, they were all constructed illegally. The HOA board members sat in stunned silence. Some residents gasped. A few even cheered quietly. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, "The evidence presented shows clear intent of fraud and unlawful property sales. I am ordering a full investigation into the HOA board and the associated developers. Pending the results, criminal charges may follow." The room erupted. Ms. Henderson's smug expression evaporated, replaced by a pale, trembling mask. The gavel came down. The HOA was finished. The aftermath wasn't simple. It took months of legal wrangling to sort out what would happen to the cabins. Many of the residents, who had unknowingly bought into the scam, turned to me for answers. At first, I was angry at all of them for being part of the problem. But then I remembered, they were victims too. David advised me carefully. You could have the cabins torn down, and you'd be within your rights. But if you work with the residents, you might not just get justice, you might also rebuild trust. So I made a deal. Those who wanted to stay could lease the land directly from me at fair rates, with proper contracts. No fake HOA, no power-hungry board. Just straightforward agreements. A few families decided to leave, but most stayed, relieved to finally know the truth. As for the HOA board members, several of them were indicted months later on charges of fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Ms. Henderson herself was led out of her office in handcuffs, her reign of intimidation over for good. The ridge was mine again. Not just on paper, but in spirit. I walked along the lake one evening, the same spot where my grandfather once taught me to fish. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in orange and gold. I thought about how close I'd come to losing it all, how easily someone else could have gotten away with rewriting history. But they hadn't. Because I fought back. Because I had the receipts. And because I remembered what my grandfather always said, protect the land. That's exactly what I did.